informing you about the May 1968 protests in France. But before we head in, let's talk about what's happening all around the world, or some part of the world. Let's put the topic of France in May 1968 and the mobilization across Western Europe. And indeed, some places in the United States would have more of a simply reform the universities. It was more of a time when America had invaded Vietnam and students' protests had begun to expand. This sort of explosion generation with active individualism, either in Rome, Athens, Berlin, even in Munich, back in America, Madison, Wisconsin, and Berkeley, California. We see that California has started this free speech movement, which had started before the protests of May 1968, as people thought about the downsides of the new prosperity that had come in France and other countries and expansion of the university systems that included more people. We started seeing these waves of protests that were linked together. In this case, France, which we are really trying to talk about, there are really two aspects of the strikes, and which there was student demonstration of the rights. The aggressive reaction by so-called the force of order, which actually led to resignation of Charles de Gaulle, which is a significant period for the protests of May 1968. We will cover that later, but here's a quick clip of how the protests went in UC Berkeley, California. With the strike in UC Berkeley, they had a foot at the door. Everybody involved in that strike knew that they could face sanctions and retaliation for what was going on. It didn't deter them. It was a rebellious time at the same time as the strike, and people were still fighting the draft and the Vietnam War. Now let's dive into the main topic, the crisis in French universities. Specifically in France, it had to do a lot with the crisis of education. The education had been seen in society that was still class based, which to an extent is still class based, which means the privilege of the upper class had the opportunity to education, even as the number of people in the university system had increased dramatically all across Europe at that time. In this photo, a wise Yale professor informed his students about how in 1964 only 2% of the university students were either sons or daughters of the worker and peasants. 2% in 1964. This is what you call a class society, and it hasn't changed very much by 1968. People blame the state for the rigidity. After all, with the power of thousands of students from a variety of universities not enjoying this solidarity the universities offered, it seemed so much that it was very frustrating, something that had to be changed. Soon enough, the police led a violent crackdown on the protesters, who responded by barricading areas around the campus. The students, with anger, started throwing objects at the police officers, such as pebbles, branches, or anything they can get their hands on. It wasn't like they were destroying the classrooms, because they were already built falling apart and soulless. In this image, a bystander named Bakunin explains to the audience this. It was a festival without a beginning or end. I saw everyone and no one, for each individual was lost in the same enormous strolling crowd. I spoke to everyone without remembering either my own words or those spoken by others, because everyone's attention was absorbed at. Not only did the students in the university strike, but also it was workers. Workers were also demanding their own raise in wages, benefits, as healthcare or other stuff like insurance. The demonstration grew in strength as workers across several industries went on strike, nearly paralyzing the nation. All work stopped. Workers demanded more pay, employment security, and more rights caused disruptions in factories, universities, and public agencies. This final image of the statistics that was happening during the month of May in 1968 month of revolution shows a drastic change throughout the dates. We see a great change in strikers and what was happening throughout the period. An overall message that we picked up today is that the 1968 France protest emphasized the social and political tensions of the time, forced some concessions from the government, and left a lasting impression on French politics and society. It is still regarded as a pivotal moment in French history and a representation of labor and student actions. And still, to this day, there are many protests and free speeches that are taking place in France. Please do your research. I'm signing out. Thank you for listening.